I'd like to wish you a very warm welcome to Beyond Ocean, a session which is part of the virtual ocean dialogues hosted by the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum. It is the first ever completely virtual global ocean event. My name is Sarah Kelly. I'm a TV news anchor and a journalist. I host the main international news program at Deutsche Welle Television in Berlin and the political talk show Conflict Zone. And I am really thrilled to be with you over the next hour in order to be your moderator. Well, as you might have guessed from the title, today's session is all about going beyond the ocean. So what does that mean? Well, action to protect the ocean presents quite literally an ocean of solutions that can benefit our societies by addressing other critical issues, including food security, nutrition, global trade and transport, poverty, human rights, gender equality, education, climate action, and that's really just to name a few. So taking ocean action goes way beyond ocean-specific issues. In today's session, we will ask how we can make those connections between the ocean and the rest of society more explicit and drive the sustainable development agenda forward in a way that benefits people and nature alike. The outcomes of this session will be presented to the hosts and the organizers of the UN Ocean Conference to be held in due course in Lisbon, Portugal. So as you can see, there is really a lot to cover today. Before we get started, just a couple of quick notes for you. These dialogues are bringing together leaders from business, government, civil society, the scientific community from around the world in order to share and scale innovations and solutions and accelerate their benefits worldwide. Therefore, the goal is to have a very live, interactive, action-oriented conversation. So participation is very much strongly encouraged. We are using the interface Slido. Many of you may be familiar with it. There you can submit your questions and you can also answer our poll. You go to slido.com. You can see our poll already there. And when you go to slido.com, enter Ocean Dialogues, then go to our session, Beyond Ocean. There you submit your questions and you can answer this poll, which is, which other SDGs do you think ocean protection will help achieve? And you can see that we have all of the SDGs listed there. We do not have the numbers, so please do use the words when you enter in your answer because we're going to be creating a word cloud that will be integrated into our conversation. So now let's get started. Without any further ado, to welcome us here, we have the great honor and the great pleasure of hearing from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern.
Ina mana, ina reo, ina iwi, ina rau rangatira mā. Tina koutou katoa, and greetings from the Blue Pacific. Thank you to the World Economic Forum and Friends of Ocean Action for this invitation to speak to you today. Let me first acknowledge the difficult times we're currently living in and the enormous challenge we are facing as countries and as communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unparalleled shock to our system and our lives. Deep impacts to health, society and the economy have been felt acutely by every country in the world, and we will continue to see ramifications for some time to come. In New Zealand, we say, he waka eka noa, we are all in this together. It's an expression with meaning beyond New Zealand in times like these. But as we start building our way out of the COVID-19 crisis, there is an opportunity to build back better, to address enduring issues like climate change and challenges facing the environment. For countries in our Blue Pacific region, ocean health is important for a long-term sustainable recovery where people and planet thrive. 98% of the Pacific region is ocean. Economies and jobs rely heavily on the ocean, for example, through fisheries, aquaculture, tourism and shipping. Livelihoods and cultures are closely linked to ocean conservation and the use of marine resources. Coastal ecosystems provide protection from natural disasters. Connections like these are reminders that a healthy, productive ocean provides benefits across all dimensions of sustainable development. Indeed, as a region, we advocated for a specific ocean sustainable development goal, precisely because the phrase ocean health equals human health and wealth, is one that's especially meaningful in the Pacific. As we emerge from the COVID-19 crisis, these connections are added incentive to drive ocean action forward and to work together to tackle challenges facing the ocean, like those associated with the climate change nexus. In their own words, climate change remains the greatest single threat to the people of the Pacific, as coasts erode, sea levels rise, and fish stocks move. It's not a hypothetical, but a reality in places I've seen with my own eyes, like Tuvalu, Tokelau, and Samoa. This is not a time to slow down our efforts. New Zealand is committed to this. Amongst other action, we've committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and will continue to be a leading advocate for the reduction and ultimately elimination of fossil fuel subsidies internationally. Working with Costa Rica, Fiji, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland, we are laying foundations for a groundbreaking agreement on climate change, trade, and sustainability, which will bring together some of the interrelated elements of these agendas and demonstrate how they can be mutually reinforcing. Continuing to invest in multilateral ocean cooperation also bolsters our chance of securing the long-term sustainable recovery that's needed. For New Zealand, this means staying the course and concluding negotiations for a new UN treaty to improve the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity on high seas. It means a rapid conclusion to WTO negotiations aimed at prohibiting harmful fishing subsidies, which will have significant environmental, developmental, and economic benefits for all. It means driving deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and reduce the burden of carbon dioxide absorption borne by the ocean. It means we keep pushing for the achievement of SDG 14 commitments through high-level events such as the next UN Ocean Conference, co-hosted by Portugal and Kenya, and the next Our Ocean Conference, hosted by the Republic of Palau in the Pacific, and through initiatives like the Commonwealth Blue Charter. It means that we continue to support the global battle against plastic pollution and the protection of marine biodiversity through a representative network of marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean. It means we are working with Pacific Island countries and seeking to ensure that countries do not lose rights over their marine resources and maritime zones as a result of sea level rise and climate change. Progress on this suite of issues can drive the sustainable development agenda forward in a way which benefits people and the planet alike. We will emerge from this crisis, but we must emerge a stronger, more sustainable global community that looks out for each other and for future generations. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
So ocean health equals human health and wealth. That was the Prime Minister of New Zealand welcoming us here today. Let's begin our conversation on Beyond Ocean. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. We have Michelle Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the former President of Chile. Kitlan Kabua is a Member of Parliament and Minister of Education, Sports and Training of the Marshall Islands. Dr. Bridget Seegers is an oceanographer at NASA, and Steve Cotton is Secretary General of the International Transport Workers Federation. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us here today. And High Commissioner Bachelet, I'd like to begin with you. As you are a longtime champion of human rights, in fact, a champion of the ocean, set the stage for us, because this session is Beyond Ocean. How important and urgent is it for us to think about ocean action as being about so much more than just the ocean itself, and identifying those connections?
Can you listen to me?
We hear you now.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Well, as we all know, the SDG 14, Life Below Water, calls for protection of ocean system marine resources for sustainable development. And we know we're going beyond ocean, and I will do that linkage. because it's key, because healthy ocean systems support sustainable development and decent work. We can eradicate poverty, we can capture carbon dioxide, we can protect life on land from extreme weather events and storm surges, and stability of climate systems. But on the other hand, hundreds of millions of people depend on the ocean for their livelihood, as we heard the Prime Minister of New Zealand mentioning in terms of fishing, tourism, marine tourism, shipping, energy. But also we know that the fisheries and agriculture sector alone supports the livelihood of 10 to 12% of the whole world's population, providing critical nutrition, and for more than 1 billion people where seafood is the main source of protein. And of course, also, it's a big source of employment for more than 200 million people that work directly in this, plus others that work indirectly. So even though the ocean is a foundation for vibrant economy, goods and services from the oceans generate 2.5 trillion US dollars a year, and is expected to double by 2030. So it makes the ocean the 7th largest economy in the world today. But in addition, by absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, oceans also provide a buffer against climate change and its negative human rights impacts, if I may say. And also we know that healthy coral reefs and mangrove ecosystem are the first line of defense against rising sea levels, storm surges, and extreme weather events. So it's clearly that there is a linkage, direct linkage on healthy oceans, with a lot of other areas that impacts human rights and that impacts other sustainable development goals of the Agenda 2030 that would permit to leave no one behind.
Thank you so much for setting up the importance of what we are discussing here today. And Minister Kabua, I'd like to turn to you next, perhaps also to underscore that urgency that we just heard from the High Commissioner, because you're joining us from an island nation. We have to mention, thank you for joining us, because it is in the middle of the night where you are in the Pacific. You have certainly been impacted by the health of our oceans. You're facing a lot of challenges, but you're also finding a lot of solutions, also to tap into that economic potential that the High Commissioner was talking about, the fact that this is the 7th largest economy in the world. So if you could just speak with us about your country, your work there, and the importance of these links between the health of the ocean and the well-being of your citizens.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and greetings to everyone. I want to thank Prime Minister Jacinda and the High Commissioner for their statements, and it's true. From the islands, ocean is our lifeline. It's the bringer of wealth and life, and for us, it's the bringer of doom. And the argument that I've been hearing throughout this week during this virtual dialogue is trying to find the connection between the ocean and its relevance to us, human beings. What we fail to understand and make clear is that us human beings, we're just a minute part of this massive ecosystem. We need to rediscover and find our place in this broader scheme of things, broader scope of things. And I want to thank my ancestors and the government for highlighting the importance of culture. Culture is something that educates us and reminds us of our unique position in life. And as I mentioned earlier, the ocean is something that we grew up with as our supermarket, as our pharmacy, as our highway, to bridge us to the rest of the world. And I mentioned the importance of culture in preserving and highlighting the importance of the ocean. This is something that we're introducing in the education sector, and I myself, being the Minister of Education, see the importance of this linkage, trying to urge our students, our children, our future leaders to look back in order to move forward, to look back at what was important to our ancestors, which is the ocean, and they found the importance and criticalness of the ocean to sustaining life. Just to remind our students and our youth of that, importance. And unfortunately, for 60 years after colonization, we've been stuck in this education system that's been pulling us away from our cultural heritage, from our knowledge. And now on, I commend the government of the Marshall Islands for recognizing the importance of tapping back, of looking back, and really discovering ourselves as Pacific Islanders, as descendants of ancestors who saw the ocean not as something daunting, but as a bringer of life. So this is something that it's a crusade that we'll be fighting for here in the Marshall Islands, as well as the rest of the Pacific nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you for underscoring that importance. And Steve, I'd like to turn to you next. Something that I found quite interesting is the fact that you were asked to describe what Beyond Ocean meant to you, and you gave the following words: accountability and responsibility, if I'm not mistaken. I'm wondering if you could tell us what that means, especially in the context of your work, because you're fighting for decent and fair work conditions for seafarers and fishers. Again, that's something that we also heard the High Commissioner mention as well.
Thanks, Sarah. So first, I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to speak. I have so many things I want to say, and I'm trying to condense it down and make some sense. So I think the first question is, we represent 20 million transport workers, but 2 million workers, seafarers. They work on the sea, and that's their place of work. And then, of course, I'll come to fisheries in a moment. But I think all of us as a society, and particularly when we look at the objectives of the sustainable goals, is to improve our lives and the lives of everybody on the planet. So there's a recognition, similar to the previous speakers, and particularly our colleague from the Marshall Islands, the ocean provides a living and an opportunity for people. So there are 2 million seafarers at the moment, and unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we have some serious challenges about those seafarers getting on and off board vessels, and we're working with all of the UN agencies, and a big thank you to all of them, to try to solve that problem. But for us, the big point is, whether you're a fisher, whether you're an acro fisher worker creating food places, and whether you're delivering goods on ships or throughout the whole supply chain, we think it's critical that we have responsibility when it comes to the planet, but also to the workers that sustain their living and provide foodstuffs to the world. So for us, our big challenge is how to make the global supply chain responsible and accountable, whether it be under the climate action, whether it be under decent work, and of course all of the other elements that are over equality, those particular issues, and a challenge for us all. I think for us, the big picture, particularly to the wider audience out there, is how do we build partnerships? I could give you lots of examples of challenges of unpaid seafarers, of fishers that are kind of bonded labour when they work on factory fishing vessels, but I'm determined that we should work together. And I think perhaps with this pandemic and some of the other political situations we see in the world at the moment, the responsibility of the UN bodies and our responsibility to work together in a mature and responsible and accountable way is utterly critical. So for us, the workers, it's really important that we build a sustainable society on the sustainable goals. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for that message. And Bridget, I'd like to turn to you next, because you're our resident scientist in this conversation. You're bringing that dimension here to the table. You've been working quite fascinatingly with identifying algal blooms. It's a big issue happening globally. It impacts economies. I'm not sure everyone is as familiar with it as you are. And I understand you have a couple of slides to illustrate to us why this is so important. And this is really an area where we can see quite directly the impact of ocean action having beyond in our societies and when it comes to other issues of sustainability. So highlight for us what's at stake here.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for having me here today, Friends of the Ocean Action and World Economic Forum. It's such an honor. And I want to also acknowledge the audience who's taking the time to be here. Hopefully this inspires action and we all end up moving forward into a healthier, happier planet. So that would be great. In terms of what the ocean offers us and what's at stake, I know we've talked a lot about economy, which is incredibly important, but also I want to point out human health. So it's not, just the jobs, but the health and healthy seafood. But during this pandemic, especially, I've been thinking about the ocean as a place for mental health as well. And so, a healthy ocean is a place for us to go to take a swim, to catch a few waves. And it's really important to have these places on the planet where we can just take some deep breaths and, find that mental health as well. So the ocean and a healthy ocean is critical for that. I do work with something called harmful algal blooms. So algae is small microscopic organisms that they are part of a healthy ecosystem. They provide us oxygen and food, but sometimes you can have too much of a good thing and they can cause problems. These images here are showing algal blooms from around the globe, and you can see they can be very dramatic visually, although some are more subtle. But along with changing the water color, they also have impacts, including producing toxins. So they can have all sorts of negative impacts. And you can imagine if you're a small coastal town relying on fisheries, the ocean is part of your traditions, all of those aspects are going to be largely impacted by this coastal toxic bloom. So this is what we're focusing on at NASA. And there's great news because there are ways we can address this problem. And like Steve mentioned, it comes down to partnerships and working broadly and together at creating solutions. Another thing I like to point out when I talk about harmful algal blooms is to remind people these are microscopic organisms, tiny little organisms. And look what they can do when they work together. They have an incredible impact on the global system. And I think we should all find inspiration in that. Think of what we can do if these guys can pull this off. We have all sorts of potential if we work together. So I want to keep that in mind as well. Thank you.
A really excellent and an optimistic note and a message I think that we're certainly hearing here. I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that we have this poll, which we are going to bring in now the results on our screen. The question was, which other SDGs do you think ocean protection will help achieve? And I mean, the answer here in terms of what everybody thinks is quite clear. Climate action, zero hunger, no poverty. We're also seeing gender equality, life below water, which is SDG 14 already. So that was already what we were talking about, but important to emphasize. And I would like to ask the High Commissioner for her reaction to this, High Commissioner Bachelet. And perhaps you can also integrate for us your firsthand experience, perhaps with how some of the SDGs that have been mentioned here were interrelated with the ocean action that you took in your native Chile, where you served 2 terms as president. You had an incredible impact also in other areas of society based upon the actions that you took there.
Well, thank you, Sarah. May I just say a couple of things before about particular human rights costs on the ocean, because I didn't mention it, but I think it's important. Is because on the ocean we have the same human rights violations as on land, because we have Stephen was speaking about that, because we have forced labor, modern forms of slavery, child labor, sexual abuse, thefts, and even murder. Is probably one of the most rampant areas of the economy where you have violation of human rights, and also the issue of these huge fleets that deprive local fishermen with the products, and many of those products are sold in industrialized countries, and so they are producing also food insecurity. So it has a lot of opportunities, and it gives a lot of possibilities like zero hunger, like fighting climate change, and so on. But we need to be clear on how we build back better, how we really ensure that the protection of oceans can ensure that you can reach all those goals. Because if whatever you do to support the blue economy is only based on profitability and not thinking on human rights and human dignity, we will produce more harm than good. But as what I can share with you as former president of Chile, because Chile is a country with a long, long coast, and of course fishery is a very important part of the economy, but we were so convinced that climate change was a reality that we needed to protect our marine areas. So we decided to do that. We decided to work on that, and I think Chile is now at the forefront of marine conservation at the global level, with 42.4% of marine areas under official protection. And among other policies, a national biodiversity strategy 2016-2030 was adopted, because we understood that climate change will produce all these kind of effects that will not permit us to advance in the Agenda 2030 to leave no one behind. Because of course, you can fish a lot, and if you overexploit the ocean, then in the future you will have a big problem, and sectors that depend on fishing for food, but also for the livelihoods, will not have a possibility. So we understood that that was really important to protect marine areas, but also to develop other kinds of activities like national parks and so on, that we could ensure that we have sort of a reserve for the country or for the humanity in terms of climate action. And we tried to do it in a way to deal, it was not very easy, I have to really say, to try to, how can I say, convince some other sectors of the economy that this was a good thing. But at the end, I was so convinced that it was necessary that I pushed forward, and I'm happy to do that, because we also could see that all fishermen, I mean, fishermen, that the local fishermen, like in Easter Island, on Island Juan Fernandez, they used their ancestral ways of fishing, and they did it great. And they could share with other fishermen in many other places of the world that this can be done, and we can protect small islands like the Marshall Islands and others, because they are not, in their case, it's not about what could happen in the future, it's what's happening now. Because with high rising sea levels, many of the people who live in the coastal areas had to leave, and then they are internally displaced. And that can also create a problem of peace and security, plus food insecurity and so on. So I really believe that it is beyond the ocean, but it's also with the ocean. And we need also to, as Stephen was talking about partnerships, and how we all work together to strengthen the use of effective national policies and laws, and also how we use different platforms like the Human Rights Council, for example, or the climate negotiations, or the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And I think that so proactively support the human rights approach to environmental action, but also including the conservation of our oceans.
Excellent, thank you. Minister Kabua, I'm wondering if you want to weigh in on that, on what the High Commissioner said, and specifically to elaborate on how ocean protection is helping you achieve some of your goals for society.
Sorry, thank you, Sarah. And I just want to mirror what the High Commissioner mentioned. Definitely here in the Marshall Islands, you know, it's a reality that we're facing now. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that the great point that was raised about, you know, looking back to traditional ways of fishing. Fishing industry is one of the largest industries in the Marshalls, and now we see the importance of looking to more sustainable means of, you know, harvesting the fish, and these are the cultural means. But I wanted to also bring up, before getting into this position, I worked heavily with environmental conservation, namely this World Bank project that was introduced to the Marshall Islands, the Pacific Resilience Program. And that project focuses on coastal resilience and preparing our people for pending emergencies, disaster, from natural disasters. And during that time, we came to realize that the more marginalized groups included women. Women and people of disability. So as a nation, we recognize the importance of protecting them. And through that, we look to empowering them economically, linking jobs that the ocean can provide to these women who, are nestled in the homes. They are mostly house mothers, and also providing opportunities for young girls in the education sector as well, just to make sure that no one is left behind while we're trying to fight this fight against climate change. And we definitely recognize the power of partnership. As a small island nation, we can only do so much. We can yell and scream on the international level, but it's important for us to band with our Pacific Island brothers and sisters, as well as larger nations. And we want to thank all those who have, turned to us and held our hands throughout this fight. And I'm grateful to be one of two women in our parliament, alongside former President Dr. Hilda C. Heine, who is a climate activist as well. So partnering with her, we want to empower women, we want to empower the youth, because they will be the ones, the drivers to protecting our nation, especially here in the small island states. But as the High Commissioner mentioned, it's a sad reality for us, and it's quite scary. And we cannot deny the fact that one of the options that people are facing and what we're seeing today is a large number of migrants out of our nation. These are people who could have provided for our country, but we understand that we can't hold them back because they have to provide for their families as well. So to mirror and to highlight what the president of Kiribati mentioned, preparing our people to migrate with dignity, which is why education is very important. And these are some topics that I also wanted to bring in. Migration out because of the effects of climate change on our ocean especially, and gender empowerment. Thank you.
So I think I counted 3 SDGs there: gender equality, partnership for the goals, and decent work and economic growth. So I mean, really interesting to see how this is playing out in your country. And Bridget, I'd like to turn to you now for your reaction to what we saw from the poll, first of all. And also, I wanted to also integrate one of the questions that we have from our participants, who is thanking us for the poll and asking, in your opinion, what is the greatest ocean problem that we need to tackle in order to help alleviate poverty and boost sustainable development? I mean, as you're really on the ground there, on the front lines, what do you think?
Wow, that's a big one. So, I mean, I think for us to address these ocean challenges, I think, yeah, we definitely need to step back and acknowledge, like this session is doing, how the ocean reaches far beyond its shores. And we need a systematic approach to addressing these issues. So if we're going to fix the ocean, and where I'm working at is the coastal ocean, we can't separate that ocean from what's going on inland, up the rivers. You know, we have to think about the landscapes. And then we have to have visionaries who can think, you know, how do we make these connections from the shores to the ocean as sustainable as possible? So green infrastructure and wetlands and things like that. And also, in order to address these issues, we need to do a lot with partnerships and with monitoring. Obviously, as a scientist, we always like data, and we often think of data being gathered by, you know, a scientist going out and sitting in the field somewhere. But I think we need to expand that vision and what we think of as scientists. So yes, of course, we have expertise in scientists, but there's also so much to be gained by working with citizens, people who are on the ground, whose communities are impacted all the time. And there's, I know, a lot of possibility right now. People with smartphones and apps can give us a lot of valuable information that tells us how their system is unique. And then we can, you know, gather that and have a better understanding. So if we're going to address these broad issues, you know, it really comes down to acknowledging what everyone can bring to this to the discussion and making sure all the voices are heard. And that's a great way to move forward. None of us are alone in this. You know, we all have to work together, and that includes academics and governments and, you know, industry, of course. They have so much expertise and lots of technologies to offer, and then of course the people. So thank you
so much. Steve, over to you next. I'd like to ask you for your response. We heard about human rights at sea, not only on land. You highlighted it, the High Commissioner highlighted it. One particular area that I was quite curious to ask you about is where you see the opportunities aligned to both protect seafarers and the oceans. And perhaps you can talk about that in the context of the SDGs and where you see the potential there.
Thank you. I think again, it's always a pleasure to be on these panels because we all come from different perspectives, but we all kind of share the overall vision that only by working together can we solve the problems. So, I mean, I've got a lot of statistics here. 60 million people work in the fishing industry, 20 million in agriculture, and 40 million capturing live fish. But I think it's a little bit like, how do we, and I think I want to tackle the question of migrant work from the other side. So the reality is there's lots of precarious work and migrant workers in shipping and in fishing, and it's kind of critical that what we would describe as the economic employer, so the receivers of the fruits of the oceans, whether it's fished by fishers, then transported by seafarers, it's ultimately us, the consumers, have to have a conversation with ourselves about what's our responsibility. So for us, it's that connection between, and particularly in this period of time when we've all been in lockdown and going to the local store that's the only place that's open, the fishers, the seafarers, the transport workers have been bringing those and making sure we have all sustained ourselves through this period. But again, we have to look at that partnership, and that's where for us, there's issues of climate, there's challenging with, the ships that our seafarers are on old technology, that they are very heavy in contributing to pollution and the climate challenges. And again, we need to work with the ship owners, the employers, and potentially the receivers of goods about how we transfer that industry into being climate sustainable. And time is running, and we all know the challenges we have there. In the issue of the human rights, I think we all know that migrant workers are the most vulnerable when it comes to being protected by national legislation, because if you're on the sea, you're kind of lost and you're governed by multiple jurisdictions. So for us, again, it's how do we use modern technology to blockchain or processes of guaranteeing payments of wages, health and safety standards, particularly health and safety in this period of challenging to post-COVID. We've seen what can happen with poor sanitary standards and those issues, and we have to look across the whole of the sustainable quality standards, whether it's making sure the oceans are clean and dealing with the pollution. I can list you the 17 fundamental we have partnerships, but partnerships with power, it doesn't work if the United Nations bodies, whichever one you work with, doesn't have the authority to hold governments, I would say, and also the multinational corporations responsible. We've worked with many supermarkets who are very interested in sustainable supply chains, and now we have to work together with governments and people to deliver that. Sarah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to sustainable supply chains, how do you see the opportunity right now for that to be framed better from the perspective of the consumer, really in financial terms as well? What sort of action would you like to see?
Well, I think we've been lucky, or because maritime is a very unique industry, we have one of the most enforceable international labour organisation conventions, the Maritime Labour Convention, which guarantees seafarers minimum wages and decent employment contracts. And we think we should look for a convention, again, in Geneva through the ILO, for the global supply chain. We need transparency. The only way you can tackle child labour, indentured labour, is by having an accountability and a transparency. We have many of the multinationals who want to see a changing playing field in respect of commercial competition, about ensuring if they provide a minimum living wage in wherever you're from, whichever part of the globe you belong in, whichever part of the world you come from, that you can then enforce. Now that means we really are dealing with globalization on the highest level, but we must rely on the UN bodies to have the power of enforcement. And we see many detractors from that these days. In the labour movement, we believe in the tripartite model. So it's critical that the international conventions are ratified by governments and provide opportunities for enforcement and penalties where there is an enforcement.
I want to talk now about ocean action in the context of this post-pandemic recovery. We heard about it from the Prime Minister of New Zealand. It's also been mentioned throughout our conversation. In the past week, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum and executive chairman, said the following. He said the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. So quite ambitious here. This has been a conversation that's been coming up all week, and High Commissioner Bachelet, I'd like to ask you to weigh in and establish that connection of how big an opportunity ocean action is for any economic recovery, and these connections that we have been talking about in our conversation. I mean, you mentioned the 7th biggest economy in the world. Surely that has more potential than is being currently harnessed right now.
Well, yes, I think it's an opportunity, as Secretary General has introduced that concept of building back better, because we don't know what to go to the 0 day before the pandemics, because we have seen that what the pandemics have led there is the inequalities in our societies and within and among countries. And we don't want to go back there. We see that the economic model now is not inclusive, neither sustainable. So what we need to build back is an economy that can be a blue economy or a green economy or a mix of them, but that they are based on other concepts, on inclusiveness and sustainability, on respect of biodiversity and the nature. So for that, we require effective laws, policies, and actions. We need to decouple the economic growth from environmental harmful practices and incentivize sustainable development for people and the planet. I think we should promote in the economy recovery a just transition to an equitable, decarbonized economy that supports sustainable lives and livelihoods. Properly protected oceans can be I would say, an engine for long-term sustainable development, new livelihoods, and also climate system stability, as I mentioned before. You know, nobody knows exactly what means blue economy because it doesn't have a single definition, but what governments and corporations have identified, that's a lot of opportunities there. And they mentioned different areas like expanded fisheries on aquaculture or tourism or bio prospecting or oil and gas or renewable energy, shipping. And all of this is very important, but I want to go back to what I said before. Because of what we have lived in the pandemic, we know that human beings are important, and that should be the main issue. So if we have all these opportunities for the economic recovery, it's fine, it's great, but rentability should not be the main goal. It should include respect for human beings, human dignity. So we need to be vigilant, because of the lockdown, some companies have been trying to call for a relaxation of regulation, including some companies that are the big violators of human rights. So we have to be vigilant because this cannot happen. Instead, we need to build a new ocean economy, environmentally sustainable and socially equitable. Because we need to go back also to those local communities who live on fishery and have been affected by big ones. So I would think we need to agree on a few basic principles, if I may say. Equity, human rights, and sustainability have to be precedence over profits at any cost in international negotiations. Second, SDGs should be the drivers. The SDGs should be the drivers on this discussion, and no industry should be excluded from this. Maybe, I don't know if ILO alone should be working on this, because it's true, ILO is very active on all of the companies and the workers and so on. And it's true what they have said about the importance of the migrants and the terrible situation of migrants. And the other thing is, yes, we have governments that respect the Convention of the Sea and so on, but we have a huge human rights violation in illegal fishing. So I think we need to define more clearly the responsibility of governments and all stakeholders against illegal fishing. So we need, and maybe, I don't know if in ECOSOC or another place, we need some agency or something responsible for developing best practices and international guidelines for the implementation and management of the blue economy, if I may say. I think government has to stop and not accept the use of forced labor in their fishing fleets, and perpetrators must be held accountable and bring to justice. Because otherwise, if there's impunity, these things will continue happening. And government needs to develop guidelines that require equitable treatment of local communities, and any wealth that is produced should be shared also with the local communities. And we had experience in my country where we developed renewables. I mean, some companies will sort of be placed in some places when they put this, huge windmills and so on, but communities around that, they will receive as well certain benefits of that. I think we need also measures to enhance environmental protection of our ocean are essential, because it's like a preventive medicine for the planet. And I think an effective response to COVID-19 and environmental crisis must be global, grounded in solidarity and in respectful humanity. And we need to also, and I think one of the big lessons of COVID-19 is that we need to understand risk and we need to plan for it. And because not to deny them, not to ignore them. So plan ahead and think in the short, medium, and long term. I think that's the biggest lesson of one of the biggest lessons. And it has to be considered on the Building Back Better. Finally, I do believe we need to protect oceans because of the important role that they play on all these different aspects. And I can say it's not only possible, it is imperative, and it can be done.
Thank you so much. I know that there was probably a lot in there that Steve, you want to respond to, but I'd like to go to Bridget first, just to distribute the time evenly. And Bridget, ask you, because you've spoken in the past about the importance of innovation. I'm wondering how you see that in the context of any so-called blue recovery, as we've heard, and especially the fact that you've mentioned it needs to happen across academia, governments, industry. What is your message? What is your call to action in the way that you see those interacting right now, and what could potentially be done better?
Great, thank you. Yeah, in terms of a call to action, I mean, it is getting out of our silos and, working across disciplines. And right now in science, we get excited when a physicist talks to a biologist, but we need to move well beyond that, talking to politicians, talking to human rights activists. We need to understand how what we know about the natural world and how it's changing is impacting our societies. And then also, you mentioned technologies and how to bring that in to the solutions. And there are so many quickly changing technologies that offer all sorts of helpful ways to monitor and learn about the situation. If we focus on harmful algal blooms, which is a coastal ocean event, there's all sorts of things that we can put into the waters on buoys, on little research robots that can actually sample for toxic threats and let people know we have an issue out there. But then there's also things that empower people on the ground, and we need to talk to traditional knowledge, which was mentioned, and understand what we can do when we bring all of these together. There is an effort right now, there's a global HAB program that already coordinates researchers across disciplines to address HABs and societal issues. And one of their big goals is to make technology more affordable. And so they're already coordinating, but there always needs to be, further investment in that, bring in industry, bring in investment so we can make these platforms that can really help understand and also solve these problems that could be distributed globally, and cost is a big part of that. So I think all of those sectors working together would be incredibly important. So.
Thank you so much. Steve, I'd like you to weigh in now. First of all, to respond to what we heard the High Commissioner say. And second of all, somebody has a really interesting question here, and I'd like to see if you might want to take it on. Somebody says the ocean links together so many sustainability issues to the point where the ideas become so big, it's hard to see how to start to influence them.
Okay, well, let's have a go at that. I think first of all, that reality is when you bring all the elements together. I'm hoping, I think all the voices in Labour are hoping that the post-COVID-19 will shake up society and recognise that it can't all be about profit, and we have to build resilience in whatever part of the economy we have to deal with, and we're dealing with the ocean today. And whether you look at it for those that work on it, work in it, or the beneficiaries of it, we have to find much better ways, less bureaucratic ways, more deliverable ways to build protections into that process. If you look at the workers in a lot of my sectors, they are Southeast Asians working on a global economy. Now, in reality, and I think this goes to the equitability point, we have to, and predominantly when we deal with the climate change, we're appealing to young people and to women. And if we don't tackle those two elements running alongside all of these big challenges, we won't find the answers. Now, without being too political, I think there's a conversation about corporate social responsibility. The power of big multinationals, and there are some that are ready to work with us, and I mean us, I mean all of us in this panel and the community, who understand that if we don't write off some of the debt, I didn't even get into Africa and fishers. There's a whole plethora of stories and challenges there, but the reality must be for us that we have to deal with debt as we understand it today, but then also build in the best practices the High Commissioner spoke about. If we don't share, how do we build a better economy, and how do we build opportunities for women to have equal opportunity, and then also young people to believe in the decision makers? Because I think when you talk about the ocean and you talk about each and every part, we have tourism members as well, and their jobs and livelihoods are decimated at the moment. We need to get them back in the process. But for us, it's how do we hold each other accountable? On Labour's part, we're ready to sit at any table, take any opportunity, take any one of the sustainable goals and bring our part to that conversation. But we need strong governance, and perhaps part of this COVID-19 is about putting more emphasis on corporations to be less short-term and be more accountable for reinvesting their profits in a way that gives the wider community, the different parts, the global south, an opportunity to develop quickly without relying on heavy pollutant technology. And I think technology is part of the answer, but it has to be handled very, very responsibly. Thank you.
And I'd just like to mention, before we get Minister Kabua's reaction to that, when it comes to a blue recovery, sustainable and inclusive recovery, we actually got some disheartening news this week saying that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have actually risen strongly to a new peak this year, despite the impact of the global effects of the coronavirus crisis, but despite these lockdowns that we have been seeing around the world. So it really shows that it is a trend that really dramatically and urgently needs to be reversed. Minister Kabua, I'd like to ask you, as an island nation, what action would you like to see from policymakers and from industry?
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to turn us to some of the talks that took place this week during this this dialogue, namely from the Getting to Zero session. And from those talks, I reiterated the importance and the role of IMO in this path to decarbonization. The Marshall Islands is the third largest ship registry. We are in charge of 9% of the ships that are on the seas right now. And from our perspective, we want to again drive the importance of IMO to tackle the carbon tax issue as soon as possible. Right now, actually, we do not have time to dawdle about with this issue, and I'm very disappointed with the news that you just brought in. And you know, it's time for us to really kick it into gear. And to answer your questions about the question that came up from one of our viewers about this, you know, dialogue being such a massive massive issue, you know, how do you begin to tackle it? It's recognizing the value of each other and partnerships, and you know, not trying to accomplish all these things just from one person, just from one nation. It's important for us to work together as one, as the panelists mentioned earlier, and to really capitalize on each other's fortes. But yes, that's one of the actions that I really want to see IMO tackling the carbon tax issue. Thank you.
And just a really quick follow-up actually for you. One of our viewers also had the question, Minister Kavua, how you as the education minister teach your citizens in order to be ocean friendly.
Great question. I mentioned earlier the current education system that we're in. You know, it's westernized. We brought this Western system of education and tried to force fit our people. You know, we're wired differently. We're people that came from ancestors that use their hands. So we want to focus on more place-based learning instead of trying to, you know, limit our children to classroom reading books in languages that are not our own, but to take them outside, expose them to the environment, really you know, making education real time, you know, associating climate change to what they see, you know, coastal erosion to coral bleaching, so on and so forth. So there's a new education system that we're implementing here on out, and it's a 4-track system. One of the 2 tracks is traditional vocational, which, you know, focuses on cultural education, traditional education, as well as you know, modern vocational and working with the hands. We think that if we reintroduce our people to our environment, that will bring back the sense of ownership, the sense of oneness, and the sense of being part of this complex ecosystem, not only in the Marshall Islands, not only in our respective islands, but as global citizens.
Thank you so much. I mean, a lot of lessons actually to be learned in there, because perhaps it really starts at a very fundamental level, understanding the importance of ocean action and this interconnectedness that we have been discussing throughout our panel. We asked the question in the beginning of our panel, how can we make those connections between the ocean and the rest of society more explicit and drive the sustainable development agenda forward in a way that benefits people and nature alike? And we just have a couple of moments from each of you to give us your final thoughts. And Bridget, I'd like to begin with you.
I think what we really need to keep in mind when we address these issues is that knowledge is power. And like was said, these large issues can be very overwhelming, but we also need to explain to people the risk of inaction. So even if you can't solve all the problems with your actions, you know, any step that we take is a movement in the right direction. So we need to break it down and, you know, remind people that it can be done, and it will only be done if we all work together. So it is hard, it is overwhelming, but you know, we've solved problems before and we can do it again if we work together. So giving people enough understanding to not just feel overwhelmed, but to understand that solutions come from these conversations, and it can we can do it. Any little bit helps and we'll get it done.
We all play our part. That's refreshing, because sometimes it can be so frustrating when you see just how how overwhelming the monstrosity of what needs to be dealt with is. Steve, your final remarks.
Thanks, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to be on the panel and share such views. I think my overwhelming word I want us all to take away is to build trust, because it doesn't matter where you fit in the ecosystem of the ocean. It's utterly critical that we all trust each other, and that requires honesty, integrity, responsibility, and accountability. So for us, it's how do you hold all the players accountable, tackle the abuses, but ultimately do the right thing. Sounds a little cheesy, but we have to respond to the climate challenge, and that means everybody has to play their part. It takes more work to be inclusive, but it's utterly critical if we want to build a sustainable, acceptable, morally responsible future. So thank you.
Minister Kabua.
Thank you. As a big encourager of tradition, I want to make known some of the fundamental values of Marshallese people. We're a culture that's founded on respect, on knowing how to care for others, and of loving each other. And again, I know it sounds cheesy, but these are the drivers. These are the fundamental values that we need to inculcate in order to overcome any challenge that we may be faced with. This pandemic, it's a brief outlook on what we can expect. I think that this is a much smaller scale of what is on the horizon, larger ramifications that we can expect from climate change. So we just need to get rid of our sense of trying to make a profit, work together to try to save this earth. And I want to thank the World Economic Forum. Thank you, Sarah, for moderating this event, and thank you to the panelists and the viewers.
Hi, Commissioner Bachelet.
Well, unfortunately, we cannot choose one SDG. We have to do the whole Agenda 2030 because, as we have been discussing, they're also interconnected and intertwined. And if we advance ones, it will be helping advancing others as well, as we know that women are essential to the fulfillment of others. But also, it's like when we say that human rights are not indivisible. You cannot choose, I respect this human rights and I won't respect the other. So it will take time. We have a decade until 2030. And probably one of the problems that we have now is that because of the COVID pandemic, many countries have diverted the money that they were for the Agenda 2030, for the SDGs, to the response of the COVID. So that's why it's so important that the international community, governments, private sector, workers, and of course, civil society, empowered civil society can find the ways. And of course, I would say also international financial institutions, because we need to ensure that we have a good response to the pandemic. But on the other hand, when we start the recovery, we link it in a very strong way with the Agenda 2030 to leave no one behind. Because if we have been better prepared in terms of not that level of inequalities, I think this pandemic would have been different. So we have no choice. We need to never give up, be enthusiastic and work together, and know that it's not easy, but it can be done.
It's humanity's survival plan. We
Yes.
need to do it. We need to do it. There is no other option. Thank you so much to all of you. That concludes our conversation portion, but we really have a treat for you now, because Donna Betterelli has been watching our session, and she is going to join us now for some closing remarks. She is the Special Advisor for the Blue Economy for the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And I'll give her the floor now. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Sarah. I would like to start by thanking the World Economic Forum and Friends of Ocean Action, and more particularly Kristen Tuleteki, for the work that went into organizing these virtual ocean dialogues. So much has been covered this week, and I don't think that one single speaker, from government officials, scientists, NGOs, and private sector, didn't address sustainability when it comes to the ocean and the blue economy. This is a big improvement just from a year ago. So while the pandemic has caused disruptions and cut demand and supply across all sectors of the blue economy, with devastating social and economic impacts, more so for the small islands, developing states, and coastal communities, the world has come to realize two things. The first is that the fate of humanity is tightly linked to the health of the natural world, and more particularly, the health of the ocean, which covers, as you all know, 2/3 of our planet and plays a critical role in regulating our climate and making life as we know it possible. The second, again, without minimizing the devastating effects of COVID, is that the pandemic has led to a positive impact on marine and land ecosystems. Less transport means less greenhouse gas emissions, less natural resource extraction, and at the same time, more opportunities for ecosystems and species to recover and reproduce. In 2018, the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming concluded, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. In light of the pandemic and the associated reduction in human activities worldwide, we can see the potential impact of such measures. So to take Peter Thompson's words, we are at the crossroad to choose either to go back the way we used to, or choose the green-blue road and make a sustainable recovery a reality. I firmly believe that we can combine production and protection, but one cannot go without the other. For that, we need to find a new financial language for conservation that resonates with all stakeholders. The economic value of conservation and of the ecosystem's biodiversity, a fish when it's alive, coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass, must be assessed versus the economic value of harvesting and extracting these resources, which is how the value of the ocean has been calculated so far. This assessment needs to be included in economic policies and planning if we are to achieve a sustainable blue economy. So the way forward is a multilateral and multi-sectoral cooperation and global coordination, in addition to adding value, introducing sustainable and circular economy practices in production and consumption, and diversifying towards economic activities that have a lower impact on ecosystems and at the same time allow job creation. Moreover, we have seen momentum built to use data, research, and innovative technologies in order to achieve these objectives. I was pleased to hear this week that it is no longer only scientists and NGOs calling on ocean management. We heard from the industry and CEOs that are calling on governments for ocean regulation, transparency, traceability, and public accountability because consumers, particularly young people, are now more aware than ever of the importance of having sustainably sourced food. So the momentum is here, it's now. Communities worldwide are asking for concrete results, actionable and binding measures, especially in view of COVID recovery. In times like these, people need good news and hope for the future. And that can be achieved this year with a successful outcome for the long-awaited High Seas Treaty, the elimination of harmful fisheries subsidies, and continuing efforts towards 30% of the ocean highly protected by 2030. And as we celebrate this year the 200th anniversary of the discovery of Antarctica, the designation of 3 large MPAs representing 4 million square kilometers, that would constitute one of the biggest acts of nature protection in history. Since 2015, with the Paris Agreement and the establishment of Sustainable Development Goals, we have clear targets and we know what needs to be done. By achieving SDG 14, Life Below Water, we will achieve the majority of the other SDGs. This is such a vital time for the world. We have the chance now, more than ever, to decide what future we want for our children. I'm hopeful that 2020 will be remembered not because of this global sanitary and economic crisis, but because we collectively understood that a pandemic knows no borders, climate change knows no borders, fish, birds, and many other species know no borders. So we have the choice then to come together and take bold actions for a sustainable, healthy, and prosperous future for us all. Thank you very much.
Such an important message and a great place to conclude our session today. Beyond Ocean, which has been hosted by the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum. Thank you so much to Donna Bettarelli for those closing remarks. Thank you so much for our panelists, participants, High Commissioner Bachelet, Minister Kabua, Steve Cotton, Dr. Bridget Seegers, for all of your contributions to this conversation, and for our participants, to you for joining us on this Friday for such an important conversation. And please do not forget that it continues. There's actually opportunity for registered participants to connect on TopLink and to share your thoughts and views. You can also continue to do so on Slido, so do take advantage of that. There's time now for a coffee break. Thereafter, there will be deep dive discussions that partners will be leading. Those will occur from 1830 to 1930 CET. So do feel free to join in on those. Thank you to all of you for your participation. I'd like to say it's been a great pleasure to be your moderator. My name is Sarah Kelly. Take care and stay safe.